Hey, look who's here.
Hello. Hello.
Hey, Terry.
How are you?
Bud?
How are you? Bill, how are you?
Fine, how are you, sir?
Actually doing pretty well.
Yeah. Thanks for coming.
Oh, of course. Have a lot of crazy things to share today.
No. Those, believe it or not, are from
Yes.
Junior
You
Optimist.
gave me some before, and we put them in the boxes after they went through them, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, very helpful.
Somebody had,
Yeah, no, it's good.
yeah.
It's good. Very good.
What I do, Bill, is I have the camera on the screen,
Okay.
so we're live.
So how you doing, Bob? Let me see. It's gone.
Oh, yeah.
Like that. I had a little nightmare about that. Hey, there he is.
Hey, Sasha.
Hey, Sasha.
Hey. How you doing?
Good, good. Have you done anything about getting this started so that you can do this on
The film?
live streaming?
Not yet.
Okay, you really should look into it.
Okay.
Did I leave you with that webcam reset?
Mm-hmm.
I gotta find out where it is. It's for things like this, where you could put it here, okay? And you could sit down there and tilt pen and control it with a remote
Oh, cool.
control.
Yeah.
So it can go to everybody who's speaking.
Interesting.
I'll send you the link
Okay.
to what it is, okay?
Yeah.
Because it would be much easier if we had something set up here. We could do it. The other,
Oh, permanently like that. Oh, interesting.
truthfully, what can be done, I'll send it to you, is what they call the security cameras. But the better versions of those are tilt pan and zoom.
Mhm.
You can have it right up on the wall, two of them. They're less than $200 a piece.
Wow.
And they're wireless.
Pardon me?
So,
Hey, Sasha, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Great.
anyway, well, I was thinking of you, so I'll give you a ring during the month. and
Okay.
Maybe we'll get together. Because that
Are you
should
gonna
be
have
something
a
that.
little bit of time after this, or you gonna scoot
That
somewhere
you
else?
can.
I got a scoot, but
Yeah.
how much time you need?
Okay.
I just wanna tell you about
So,
some conversations I had at Calhoun. I think there may be an opportunity here.
Okay.
More for what you do than me.
Oh, he needs more work to do.
Actually, I do.
Yeah, well, you told us, remember?
We're kind of at a lull right now.
Yeah, well. Let's just say that, in happenstance, I was with all the honchos there, and they all know me, and they're asking me how I'm doing, and they had not seemed to have heard what you're doing here. And I filled them in, and
Good morning, guys. How you doing?
Good, hi.
How you doing? Mitchell,
Mitchell.
City of Ventura.
Bill Simmons.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks for
How
coming.
you guys doing? Mitchell. Sasha. Nice to meet you. What's going on, sir? Mitchell,
Bob
City of Ventura. Nice to meet you.
Terry Howard, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Sorry for the donut and ham.
Oh,
They're
no
right over there.
problem.
They come from your part of town, we don't have them in our part of town anymore.
Where do you live?
Westlake.
Westlake? Okay.
Welcome. This service is provided by freeconferencecall.com. Please enter your access code followed by the pound or hash sign. If you are the host, please enter your PIN followed. Thank you. There is one host and two participants in this conference. Please announce yourself.
Hi, everybody. This is Bill Simmons, and we're gonna wait another few more minutes for the folks to show up here. Mitchell, help yourself to donuts over there.
I think I'll take you up on that. Is there coffee there as well?
There it is.
That's the only reason we show up.
Thank you. Yeah, I think Tim used to come to these meetings, right?
You did.
Yeah, so I think there was kind of a gap on our part with that. We should be hiring an IT manager pretty soon.
Consortia, not consortium. Interesting.
No, it is, you're right, that's a typo. It should be consortium.
Yeah.
It should be singular.
There
Gentlemen?
it is.
Uh-oh, who's
Hey,
he,
how are you?
who's he talking to?
Sorry? Yeah, around.
Hey Sasha.
Hey.
I was
Mitchell
teasing.
Cameron? Oh, good to meet you.
Hey,
Mitchell?
nice to meet you too.
Yeah,
Your name?
neighbors from the city of Oxnard.
Oh, hey, nice to meet
So
you.
your council meeting.
Right?
I was teasing you.
Hopefully we didn't.
Sorry?
I said I was just teasing you.
Oh, hello.
All right, we're waiting for people to show up. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, this is Joe Correll from the Illinois Advisory.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting.
How's that?
There he is.
Gentlemen,
Hello, how are you?
good, how are you?
Great.
Nothing like morning in the morning.
Good news?
Good.
Good. Good, how you
Good
doing?
morning, this is Cynthia.
Hi, Cynthia.
How are you doing this morning?
Good, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Bill, good morning. It's Ruth Venus from Ventura County.
Ruth, thank you.
Finally, thank you. So, I finally made it,
Thank you for joining us.
absolutely.
And I good with you?
Yeah, we're really busy, man. It's crazy.
Yep.
Pretty good.
Kevin, and you're really showing commitment because this is your day off.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Hi, how you doing?
How are you?
You're presenting today, aren't you?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
You
Hey,
all right?
Jordy. Hi, how's it going? How are you? Hi, Roy.
Hello, Jordy, how you going?
Jordy? Would it be, Jordy, would it be terrible if you stand on that side? Cause
Wouldn't
when,
be terrible at all.
yeah, cause then we can get a frontal view when you, and you normally have some good.
Well,
That would be terrible.
Beauties.
We don't think so.
Beauties in the eyes of the beholder.
That's right, that's right.
Should I move to the other side of the table?
Absolutely. I didn't wanna say it when you walked in,
East on
but,
this
you
side,
know.
east on the, beauty on the left, east on the right.
There it is.
Okay, here we go.
Hey, look, I'm walking.
Hi, Hater.
Hey, Heather.
How you doing?
Told me to look
Good,
for
thank
everything
you.
Repeatedly.
Isn't that the truth?
Not quiet.
Yeah. We've got, we're right on a quorum, it looks like here. But everybody's pondering. Either that or looking at the donuts.
Lunch and email.
Let's show them what they're missing.
Yeah. Why don't we go ahead and get started? And let's just do once around the room and on the phone. And I noticed that a lot of people have discovered the call in because it was popping there, people joining us, and that's great. Also, I noted that we had some new faces that were gonna be popping in, as well as a lot of folks are on vacation because of the summer months. And so I think today's gonna be a mixed bag, but I'm just really thrilled that I do think we have a number of folks on the phone as well as a growing room full here. So with that in mind, I'm Bill Simmons, in the Coordinator Consortium. Sasha, why don't we go around that way?
Okay. Sasha Burrows, City Spark and AmeriCorps, and working with DCPC.
Corey Welton, John Advisor. Grace Hayward, Water Einstein.
Terry Howard, Municipal Broadband.
Brian Shaw, City of Moore Park.
Bob, oh, I'm sorry.
Kevin Casassa, City of Oxnard.
And Mitchell Cameron, City of Ventura.
And Bob Allen, KDTV.com, and
Hi, George Amendola, Cyber Dynamics. Morning.
And on the phone now. Let's try to give yourself about 2 or 3 seconds in between, but just start letting us know who's there.
This is Ruth Venus from Ventura County Information Technology Department. I'm the Enterprise GIS Manager.
Hi, Ruth. Who else was there?
Joe Wassel, Econ Lance.
Hi, Joe. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Joe Bell.
Yep.
Yeah. Good morning, Tim Williams, Digital West.
Hi, Tim.
Joe Corella from the Magellan Advisors. Bill, looking forward to meeting you.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for being there.
Good morning, Harold Along, the City of Thousand Oaks.
Hey, Dirk.
Cynthia Campos with Crown Bronco. Good morning, everyone.
Hi, Cynthia.
You know, the head to take.
Anybody else on the phone?
Good morning, Gil Deming with Spectrum.
Gil, thanks for joining us. Anybody else? Okay, I think that's great. Yeah, and we've got a house full. So what we're gonna do today is just kind of catch up. We're kind of in a lull between grants, but a lot of things going on, a lot of seeds being planted, a lot of opportunities are being opened up wide, and a lot of exciting conversations are taking place. I'm gonna let Sasha go first with his update, talking about communications. He's got a 9 o'clock phone call, so let me go through the agenda real quick, and then I'll come back to Sasha. After Sasha, we'll talk about CPUC and the funding that we've got coming. I think we've got some interesting minds and key opportunities to discuss what happened this last week in the city of Ventura, and that'll be an interesting discussion to be part of. I'd like to talk a little bit about the municipality roadmap that we did a couple of years ago, and recruit some of you to help me come up with the next version, a new and improved roadmap. I want to talk a little bit about the consortia and where do we need to go next, because we are in this lull, and I'll give you a full status of that. And then the roundtable, around the table wants to talk about updates if we have time. So this is coming on Sasha's last month, I believe, July. And so he's been with us a year, and he has a project. Yeah, it's hard to believe.
It is.
Wow. He has a project that he's got to brief out to Civic Spark. And so I thought that would be a great idea for him to just share lessons learned, experiences, what he's telling everybody in the Civic Spark program about us, and anything else he'd like to share, because we may not have the benefit of having him a month from now. This was a fellowship. It was clearly, when the 1 year is up, he can go back to school, he can get another job, he can continue whatever he wants to do, but it was, you know, really geared towards an academic experience, and I think we've provided that, so. Yeah, so take it away, Sasha. Pull up the slides here if you'd like.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about, I presented yesterday. I had a kind of a Skype conference call with a lot of the people in Civic Spark, and I kind of wanted to talk to you guys about what I talked to them about, and almost show you the presentation that I gave them. But so I started out talking about the project, the VCPC, under the EDC and the Ventura County Partnership, and how it's a tri-county effort, and it's a collaboration to advance broadband efforts and strategies, developing solutions to problem solving and looking for gaps. And one of the things that Civic Spark really focuses on is gaps. We did a gap assessment at the beginning of the year, and two things from kind of a social standpoint. My colleague focused on the politics. He's also in broadband, but I really took a social kind of approach to it, and I found that the gaps were really in education and in local leadership, like civic leadership, and so that's kind of what I focused the presentation on. So I talked a bit about my duties, which I'll share with you. So at the beginning of the year, data analysis, working on the anchor institution list, as a lot of you guys already know, which is great, which got transferred into a map with the help of a few people over at the Ventura County IT department. And then doing a lot of communications and coordination. So I created like a little dictionary of broadband terms for other fellows and people who are kind of didn't understand the concepts and issues surrounding broadband.
Before you go too far, for those folks on the phone, I didn't get these slides out to the folks listening, so if you wanted to dial on to kadytv.com, there's a link there. You can see, Bob, I think you probably got the slides on your camera and you can see what Sasha's talking about.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm sorry.
Could you repeat that URL, please?
kadytv.com.
Thank you.
And you get to the right-hand side of that page, there's a yellow box and it has links and it says live. And you click on the live link and for broadband and it'll take you to a YouTube channel and you'll find us. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Cool. Okay, so creating the dictionary, and if there's a place that I can provide any links or any of these tools, if anybody wants to see any of them, that'd be a fantastic opportunity. And then helping build the contact list, so going through with Bill and looking who's been involved with VCPC in terms of meetings and summits and things like that, and kind of compiling that and having a database there for that. So that's been a really good project, and we have a lot of contacts, which is really great. GIS aid, a lot to do with the anchor institution list, creating, just bringing that data over to people like Cole over at the county, and that was a huge help in building those maps and just getting those anchor institutions onto something tangible that we could take a look at. And that kind of leads into the liaison bit that I explained yesterday as well in that presentation. And then also recently focusing on social media and educational tools, which have been really fun for me. Kind of, again, with that gap in education, looking for ways to just let people in the community know what's going on in the sphere of broadband and why they should know about it and why they should, things that they could be involved in. And one of the educational tools that I want to show you guys was essentially I call it a visual journey. So I don't like to read long blocks and text of information, so trying to figure out how to make an educational tool that's just all visual with as little as possible and keeping it entertaining. So I created a bunch of panels: who, what, where, when, and why, and how. How's still under construction. So I ran through these yesterday, which was really great. Everybody seemed to, get into it and be able to understand it more than just sitting and lecturing it to them. So the who essentially is what it is. It's talking about how consortium, especially VCPC, kind of came about, and then under the Broadband Consortium, all the kind of the duties and also goals that the consortium has, which will lead to the next panel, which is the what panel. And these were kind of the problems that when I sat down and thought of it for Civic Spark, for my program, I really thought, what would I write out if they asked me, what are the problems with broadband? What are the issues going on right now? And these are the things that I came up with that I thought were most important. Again, I take a very social approach. Like I said, my colleague was very political. He liked to look at the world 1,000-foot view. I like to kind of think of my thinking as on the ground, is what's going on. So just a couple of cool things that I pointed out that were issues were lack of regional approach, unawareness of the importance of broadband in the future of smart city development, digital divide issues, digital literacy issues, or unaffordable connection, obviously, and then this was a really important one that I like to highlight, was the lack of commitment to broadband as the deserved fourth utility, and a lack of civic understanding. So this was a great panel. I think people really understood this quickly. It could have been a lot more difficult for them to have to read a bunch of pages in text, and I think this was very successful in just giving people, a straight shot as to what they should know. The when, I like this one. The when panel is essentially when, and the when is now. So these are all the things that in these 4 different categories. The when is what is going on in broadband now, what is broadband contributing to, and what is the future going to be like. So like in education, access to educational tools, remote education, digital literacy, these are all things that are being worked on now or are happening now, and technology, ubiquitous wireless service, smart communications, autonomous vehicles and drones, those are under development, all things that are happening now again. And then economy and social equity. And Civic Spark really focuses on the social equity aspect. They come from this perspective of trying to identify in all of our projects where there are injustices or people who lack resources that should have them, things like that. So I really focused on that as well in the presentation, which was great. They seem to really enjoy that, throwing in what they love to hear. The where, just to explain to people just where the Tri-County area, so the 3 counties, and within that little visual triangle is just everything that we work and hope to accomplish. Everything that's going on now, like meetings, data and map sharing, creating this regional network, collaboration, creating maps and GIS, communications, connectivity, all sorts. And then the why. This one was very text heavy, but really sitting down and thinking why broadband access and adoption. Why are we all here working on all of this? And I split it into economy, social equity, and public health and safety. And some of these were really good. I did a lot of thinking, a lot of searching. But these are the kinds of things that I came out. There's obviously things that are missing, but these are what I find most important to know is why. When someone approaches me and asks me, why do you do what you do? Why does everyone do what they're doing? And this is the graphic I provide them. This is what I tell them. So, for economy, it's just connecting businesses, global marketplace, electric shopping has increased, reduced threats to e-commerce, home businesses, rural occupation, for social equity, things like broadband equity, access to education, bridging the digital divide, fixing digital literacy issues, and then public health and safety. I really enjoy this category, telecommuting, distance learning, education, learning from pretty much anywhere, and then telemedicine, which is really cool. I knew about that, but I just didn't do any research on that. Having a Skype call with your doctor if you're a certain age or if you are able to go there. And so these are all the great things that this is all this work is going towards. So I thought it was worth putting in and presenting. Just to let people know that I'm still developing a final panel. But that's going to be the big one. That's going to be the most important one of all, is how are we accomplishing all this? And then takeaways, they were very simple questions that I asked, but they seemed to last forever. I mean, I think we spent almost 45 minutes talking about these questions, which was surprising to me because they're very simple questions, but I guess when you're not working in broadband connectivity, it is that interesting, which is exciting. But why is broadband and connectivity important to you? Being able to pick up your phone. Yesterday picking up my phone and looking for job applications. People can't do that. A lot of people can't do that. So it's just, it's very privileged in ways that you don't understand. And talking about injustices again, that was a huge conversation yesterday. Didn't seem like many people were firsthand experiencing or knew people who experienced it, but it's obviously out there in terms of the broadband world. And then do you see broadband as a fourth utility? That was another big thing that we talked about. I think it was kind of difficult to explain to people why broadband is like the fourth utility, and that they didn't really understand that concept very much. And the people I'm talking about, they're in water tracks and climate issue placements. But so this is everything that we talked about, and also kind of a summary of this year. But I thought it would be worth showing all of you.
When you say that they have problems understanding it as a fourth utility, do they have questions? What kinds of input did you get from them that seemed to...
The questions were kind of surrounded by there's no law or there's no policy that would make broadband a fourth utility. So that seemed to be kind of the questions surrounding it, is if it should be considered, why hasn't it been? And that's kind of a question to go back and you go and take a look at the history of broadband, and there's a lot of things that have happened and led up to the reason why it's not a fourth utility. And
That gets back to your leadership.
yeah, exactly. But that seemed to be the answer. And we had Steve Blum on the call as well, and he joined later, and he had a lot of great explanations that the other fellow and I couldn't necessarily give. And we had some really, really broad discussion topics and questions that, you know, some people droned on into. If a country were to turn off its access to connectivity or broadband, is that illegal or something? And you know, Steve was trying to figure out how to answer that question. And there were a lot of weird questions asked. People were really interested, but I mean, that's what you'd get if you didn't know. That's exactly the education standpoint, is the questions come from a place of just complete lack of understanding, which is okay. I mean, I don't understand anything that they're doing in their projects either, but yeah.
It's great that Steve is spending the time having the conversation with you guys.
Yeah.
From a strategic planning standpoint, we always talk about the fact, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? But you have to understand the elephant first. You know, and I thought that in terms of the way he scoped this out, this broadband elephant of ours, you know, I think that it was a great picture of all the pieces and parts. You know, and so now we have, you know, we didn't really have the world of broadband in a graphic presentation before. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see what we can do with it now that we have it and how it can be used. And so different kinds of media, different kinds of personalities. You know, I think that it's a great product for the consortia that he's created that we can use. Any other comments? Yeah, George.
Sasha, wondering about your fellowship and where are you at with your education and what are your goals? I mean, that's a very good presentation.
Thank you. Yeah, where I'm at right now is applying for jobs, but then also still considering the options of further education. I'm currently, my parents were away, so this weekend I'm going to visit them and kind of have a sit down talk of, you know, they're gonna not help me, but you know, be a sounding board that I can just, you know, talk to and figure out exactly where I want to be, because Civic Spark promotes further education and they you know, they provide some money for you to go back to school and stuff like that. So really trying to consider where I'm at right now is what's going on.
Right. And what kind of job would you ideally like to have? Any idea about that?
Ideally I've been looking at a lot of city jobs, so planning, which obviously involves probably another degree, but so been looking at planning, been looking into broadband as well and stuff like that, but still very much in the search.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
And you finished your bachelor's, what's your degree in?
Environmental studies.
Okay, environmental studies.
Yeah.
I can get you into planning. I also want to join MMASC based on what you're looking for, if only for their access to their job listings, because they have quite a few. It's the Municipal Management Association of Southern California, which is the kind of the professional organization for bureaucrats, for lack of a better term.
And your placement rate's only 20% these days, right?
I'm gonna say higher than that.
Good, we'll split it.
Yeah.
You plan to stay in this community, or?
I'm actually thinking of multiple places for my future. I'm not quite sure yet. Again, I'm having that discussion, but I'm obviously thinking about here in Ventura County. It's I grew up in Thousand Oaks, so it's all familiar to me here, and I'd love to be here. But then I'm also looking into places like Portland and Seattle. Just because of their planning and their commitment to sustainability and green cities, just kind of, that's the whole environment.
But by the way, the sun only shines 65 days a year.
Yeah, that's something to bring up, yeah.
I went to school in Eugene, in Oregon, so I've already got I already got hit over the head with that.
Not good for the suntan, right?
Yeah.
All right, Sasha, thank you. And you still have your 9 o'clock call?
I do, but
All right.
I will sleep back in if that finishes in time.
Sasha, that was really great.
Thank you.
Good stuff on there.
Very impressed.
Let's move on and talk about the CPUC update real quick. And I don't think this will take more than 5 minutes. Every time we meet, I remind everybody that the funding that had been received from the Public Utilities Commission is about rural areas and unserved. and they provide maps of priority areas, and in this next round of funding, they, instead of coming up with a proposal, they basically said, here are the objectives we want you guys to bid to. And so this is the work that for phase 3 of our grant, they have asked us to do. And so we're going to continue to focus on the rural areas. And as of, let's see, today's Thursday, Monday, we received notice from them that they had looked at our proposal. They had 8 questions, and the questions were basically elaboration. So that it's moving pretty fast. May 17th is when we turned it in, and get a response back now with just 8 little details to have to dot the i's and cross the t's about. It's pretty fast, and so I anticipate we have to get those questions back in by Tuesday, the 2nd of July, and then I would expect that within 30 days, we'd probably be looking at a resolution and having this start in the August, September timeframe. And so the funds are there, there's no competitive, the consortia is a consortia where we represent the region and the collaborative stakeholders, so there's not any evaluation or competition involved, it's just a matter of continuing the funds to do what we do.
Can I ask
So-
a question?
Yeah.
What's that last point? Assisting the commission in publicizing requests?
I think that has a lot to do with the accuracy of maps.
Okay.
You know, one thing that's been very, very key of interest is ground truth. And I think that when it comes to proposals and validating that this is indeed unserved, and I think they want to be able to use the consortia to go off and help collect data. Frankly, when we wrote the proposal, we didn't put a lot of effort into that at all. I mean, because we have no way of knowing how much is going to be required. And so I didn't want to pad that or put any real effort. I wanted to hit the areas where we know that we need to hit, versus trying to go off and just wait for them to go tell us to go off and do things. And so that's going to be on an as required basis. And the questions that they've come back with, they don't dispute that. So thanks. That was my report on CPUC and where we're at. It's moving forward, and as we get into the agenda today, we'll talk about what else. But in terms of what our bread and butter has been in recent years, that's the status. Any input, feedback, thoughts before we move on to the next topic?
Bill, did you know, I think the question of when they're updating the broadband map, does anybody know when that's gonna happen? Is that 2019? I know the date is 2017. I think we talked about that, but I'm wondering if we know that date when that's gonna be updated.
I have not heard clearly, but I'm getting indications that it may coincide with the new consortia funding.
Okay.
That they'll give us a new set of data that's new and improved priority areas and what they know it will be refreshed. You're right, 2 years is a lifetime in this business. And to say this is what it was 2 years ago, it's changed. It's changed dramatically. So, good question. So this has been an interesting week. We had a great meeting, I guess, Monday night. I'll be interested to hear the details. And as you know, our interests here are regional, but at the same time, what Magellan is doing in Oxnard and is doing in Ventura, and the discussions you're having with the county are all, we like the fact that there's a facilitated dialogue occurring. And the implications of those 2 cities in the county and the other 8 cities are of interest. And so I wanted to just, we've got Ventura here and Oxnard here and Magellan here. If you guys want to just share in terms of your various perspectives, what's occurred, where you're at, and I think then from those 3 positions, and Brian Ganley is on vacation right now, he couldn't make it, but I know that there's conversations occurring among everybody. Vision, we have Ruth Venus from the county with us, and we've been talking quite a bit about what the county is doing with the GIS, and Sasha has been involved in anchor institutions and in that conversation as well. Interested in just having a session where we just all get on the same page and talk about this. So, Mitchell?
Yeah, so we went to council Monday night to have a discussion and release the report that we worked with Magellan on what the city of Ventura can do to obviously increase broadband connectivity in the city. Magellan did a great job, they put together a really thorough report, and I think council, for the most part, received it fairly well. Even though we didn't get it out early enough, which I agree was a problem, I think the intent was to get out a lot earlier, and unfortunately, I'll take ownership that we didn't, but the report is available if anyone wants it. Let me know, I'm more than happy to email it out to anyone. I think it's important, there's a lot of really good content in there, and I think it's gonna enable us, at least at the very minimum, to educate myself, and I think the rest of the city staff on what we can do to be more broadband friendly, more fiber friendly. With that being said, we did get direction from council, so we are gonna receive and file Magellan's report, and I think we'll continue to look at our capital projects or CIP projects, to identify opportunities to lay fiber, lay conduit. I think one project that we'll really focus on is our traffic signal project, and that is something that is up and coming. We're spending $500,000 on design work right now for that. And then obviously, when we move forward with that, there will be a fiber component regardless of the direction we go. And then second, we got direction to continue working with local ISPs or incumbent ISPs to increase service levels in the area. So we've worked with Spectrum, we're setting up meetings with AT&T to really identify underserved areas in the city, and obviously we receive that information from working with Magellan and our survey information. So that's what we hope to do, and if there's anyone else that wants to meet with us or have discussions with us, let me know. I'm definitely not the expert by any means, but I'm more than happy to help facilitate the conversation and at least set up meetings with whoever we need to. And then lastly, council gave us direction to work with, to seek private investment to increase fiber connectivity in the city. That is really I think the biggest point here is we did receive an offer from Sci-Fi, who's working with Fullerton right now to do a fiber, fiber to the premise FTP in the entire city. So we're exploring that option. They'll be presenting to our Economic Development Committee meeting next Monday. We are, obviously, we have a lot of work that needs to be done before we do anything. What some of the internal discussions are, I think what we'll end up doing is releasing an RFP to everyone in regards to laying fiber throughout the city. So the RFP is in development, but we're really looking to get direction from our Economic Development Committee meeting, or from our Economic Development Committee on Monday, or Tuesday, I'm sorry, I said Monday, it's Tuesday of next week. And I'll keep everyone in the loop on the outcome of that meeting. But I know timelines are gonna be pretty tight following that meeting. So again, I'll keep everyone in the loop, and if you guys have any feedback for me, let me know. I'm pretty transparent, and I know I'm not the expert, and everyone here knows a lot more than me, so I appreciate the input.
Do you have an idea of how you're gonna fund any fiber cabling installation?
All right, that's a great question. And I think that's ultimately what led us to the direction that council gave to us, is the fact that we don't have funding available right now to implement some of the recommendations from Magellan. It's about a $10 million project over the course of 10 years, and we simply don't have the funds. And I don't necessarily know if we would be able to get that sort of support. So that's why we're looking to the private sector to really, help us, increase service levels in the community. And we're hoping that, if anything, we can just get out of the way, right? and not get in the way of other people improving our city. So it's a huge concern for us, right? So, and I think utilizing our existing CIP is gonna be the only way to do it. But even that is still relatively expensive. So for example, our traffic signal project, the fiber component, is a large portion of the entire project. We're estimating $6.2 million right now for that project. I would say, my understanding is about 60% of that is fiber. And that budget assumes that we'll be able to use 80% of our existing conduit, which is, we're not sure what that will actually look like. So there's uncertainty right now, so I think it's important that we explore all avenues as we move forward. And again, if anyone has any recommendations or advice, I think we're more than open to that.
My general takeaway looking at the report was, I think Magellan did a great job of capturing the what. The how is what we're talking about. You know, and that's gonna be a series of conversations, I'm sure. You know, it really is, how are we gonna do this? But, you know, the vision and the execution and the plan, I think is pretty, it's great to have that kind of clarity.
The plan does lay out a blueprint for how to go about doing it, but in this case, again, it requires a budget.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of conflicting priorities in Ventura right now.
Absolutely. And this is a really long-term commitment too. I mean, I think it's important to keep that in mind as well. I mean, we're talking about spending $10 million over a 10-year time frame. So it's a significant commitment, not only from a financial perspective, but just from a human resource perspective as well.
Not looking at January 1st.
Right. Yeah, I think that was definitely a concern. That's something that we highlighted as a consideration, is the fact that if we executed perfectly, we're not looking to have any additional connectivity until 2022 with that plan, which is a consideration that we have to take into account.
Mitchell, this is Tim Williams. What was the meeting you have on Tuesday? Tell me again what that was.
We're going to our economic development committee. So we have 3 council members on that committee, and Sci-Fi will be presenting, just to provide some education and some knowledge to council, or to those 3 council members, regarding what the private sector can do to help support fiber connectivity in the city. So.
Okay.
That's an
I
open.
have a call
Yeah.
tomorrow, so
Yeah.
it's probably go down.
That's an open meeting, right?
Open meeting.
Yeah.
So it's in Santa Cruz conference room. Usually it's pretty tight in there for the most part, but it's definitely open to the public.
Yeah.
So I think we had Spectrum was at the last one, and George was at the last one as well. So it's really helpful to get the input. I think it's still an educational process, I think, for our leadership team, which I think is important.
Any other thoughts to share on the Ventura situation, George?
No, I think Mitchell hit it right. I think there's always, some members of council that are still trying to understand that this isn't a utility and trying to understand how to place it within the spectrum of all the other commitments that they've made to the community already, unfunded CIP projects and other priorities that they've established, and especially in today's times we are now, of trying to sort of keep the potholes fixed and things of that sort. It becomes a question of, is this a necessity or is this an amenity of some sort? And I think that's what I was reading in the council discussion Monday evening. And again, it's just a matter of ranking and prioritizing with all other matters, and they've got some pretty important ones to consider. At the same time that we're talking about spending $10 million on broadband, they're talking about fire stations and fire department and CIP projects, many of which are underfunded, and some which are not being considered, which are of significance. So it's a matter of balancing all of that. But again, I think it's still, getting councils to understand the value of the investment. And the interesting thing that I watch all the time is some councils just look at it from its immediate impact on the budget, not the long-term view. There is the long-term view is some councils say, well, this is an investment in our future. And they also look at the opportunity to lease the assets that they invest in. Some have already developed those assets, and Ventura does have assets that could be leased, as does Oxnard. But when councils really start to take a look at, well, what is our community gonna look like in 10 or 20 years? Then they start to see more of the value of this investment and trying to find ways to set money aside over a period of time, and follow these plans and implement them. Again, they've got to get over the hurdle of what the immediate impact is going to be in their budget. And if they can, then they take that next step. And I don't get the impression from Ventura that they don't want to take that next step. It was very clear that the majority of the council members said, we're not gonna shelve this, that we want staff to take this forward and do something with broadband. So it's just a matter of not saying, okay, we're gonna invest right now, but let's see if we can get others to invest. And if others can invest, it reduces our hit and we can spend our money on the other priorities. And then we'll come back to this and these recommendations and consider those at a later date.
I was so impressed with Sasha's take on leadership. I swear I didn't lead the witness on this, but getting leadership is going to be in all of these cities and councils. Our biggest challenge is, is getting the political will to make the investments and to do what needs to be done, and also get out of the way for industry to come in and do things as well. But we gotta raise it, the awareness and visibility to that level where, yeah, everybody's committed to making this happen.
And we have to change the perspective, because they usually traditionally only deal with expenditures. There's no ROI at the end of most of these endeavors. So to get them to understand that you're putting money in to get money back out is a completely new dynamic to them.
Exactly. Well, and they only deal with expenditures, so they don't understand investing in entrepreneurial efforts. Some do, some cities. I would say many cities in the Bay Area see it that way. Here in Southern California, I think they're just used to the status quo, and this is sort of it's interrupting the normal flow of thinking in a business. Bring us what you want us to spend money on, and it's not bring us a new business plan for how to run this or portion of the city. That's not what they're familiar with. So maybe, maybe a lesson learned here, and maybe not just here, but in many cities, is really how we prepare council for the report that's coming. And so that they understand that this isn't just another expenditure, but this is an investment in your future. And we did do that with the council members in Ventura, and I thought it was very, very effective. Joe, who's on the phone, spent a lot of time with each of the council members. I did some personal time with a couple of them as well, and they all got it. And I would say every council member was supportive of the plan. There was one in particular that I don't think had read the plan, and had they read the plan, it would have been more clear to them, and there wouldn't have been as many questions. But I think in total, involving councils early on, educating them about the value of this proposition is very key.
Yeah, and on that, I think our council is really supportive. We're fortunate in that they've been really supportive. They're open to this sort of thing, but I think you can all agree if you're faced with two options, a $10 million,
That's why you have to lead with, how would you like an extra $4 million in your budget every year? Oh yeah.
Right. No, and that's a very valid point. But I think ultimately, I think it's a I don't want to say an easier decision. It's a more equitable decision, right? When you're faced with these other priorities, which include filling potholes and getting keeping the lights on in the streets, Right. So I think it's a very fair decision, and I think I feel fortunate that our council has been so supportive.
I think there's the answer to that is going to be when more councils do invest and they do generate revenue, then there's going to be an easier understanding that, okay, we can do this as well.
And Santa Monica's lead didn't prove that to them?
Well, Santa Monica's lead, I think, does, and every time we have a conversation with a leader, a civic leader, it seems to impress them, and they say, well, why can't we do the same thing? And oftentimes, I even find myself saying, well, this won't work. It worked in Santa Monica, but it won't work here. And I don't want to go through all of those details. We kind of had a little bit of that discussion yesterday in Oxnard. I think if the council understood that, okay, this is like the playbook, and there isn't any risk, because 50% of the cities that have attempted to do this have been successful, or maybe it's 60%. I don't know what the threshold is going to be. But once we get that critical mass of cities that have good operating P3s, then it's going to be, I think, easier.
Yeah, that's fair.
We're still early.
If I could, this is Joe. I just want to support everything that Mitchell and Jory have said, and I want to offer one other observation. This is an unusual kind of project. In many respects, it's a long-term capital investment, and it's somehow seen potentially as much more operating expense. There could be more emphasis on the long-term cash flow and return on investment. It's easy to stumble over a $10 million price tag, but it's not clear that the focus is necessarily on the return on investment and what it does both financially and intangibly for the city's longer term. I think we saw a little of that Monday night.
Quantifying the intangible would be good too, you know?
It's very
Property
difficult.
rates go
Agree, I
up
think-
or whatever it may
I
be,
think
you know?
Yep, the intangibles as well as, long-term ROI, even if we take extremely conservative revenue estimates. But that's for another day and another council meeting, I think.
Well, but I think the takeaway for me in general for Ventura was they were all very supportive. I think I've been at this now 40 times, and I think Ventura is among a small group where we've had unanimous agreement that something should be done with broadband, and have directed staff to actually move forward as quickly as possible. So it's, I think, good for the region, this first venture.
So I'd like to, George, if you could wrap up the Ventura situation from the audience perspective, and then go to Oxnard and Moore Park, and let's keep the conversation going.
Sure. Grateful to have Mitchell here. He and I met about a year ago, and at that time, Mitchell was just, I think, promoted into the city manager's office. And during this time, Mitchell largely knew nothing about broadband, admittedly so, and he gave a tremendous presentation last month at the Economic Development Committee meeting. Monday evening's presentation was a lot different than the one you had given at the Economic Development Committee, but I just wanted to recognize you for a great presentation that evening. And Ventura is in a position now where I think we have good leadership at the city manager's office, and what I envision is probably the best leadership we've had in at least 15 years. And I'm encouraged by that because now Mr. McIntyre has his team in place. And with his team, I'm expecting that he will be able to grow Ventura's economy, grow Ventura's administrative services, and also find unique opportunities for Ventura. It was good to have the Magellan report come to council. The short notice of 3 days, I don't think very many council members read it. It was 173 pages. I don't think that many council members truly understand the economic impact potential. The report that Magellan put together was excellent. So as far as I think it was structured, as far as how it dug into the opportunities within the city, but if people don't read it, then it's very difficult to get a buy-in. So I think potentially that needed to be presented a little bit differently to the majority of the council members. One thing that I think would have benefited council is to understand the economic impact. The economic impact from a sales tax, the potential growth of sales tax revenue by having broadband within the community, and then also the impact on utility taxes. And I envision that with a greater consumption of bandwidth, a greater consumption of utility taxes, because the utility taxes with legacy POTS telephone services are falling by the wayside. The utility taxes associated with subscriber-based cable is starting to drop. So how does the economic impact of the utility tax affect the general fund at large with maybe a growth level, and possibly could some of that growth be carved off if it's forecasted properly to drive broadband? That wasn't discussed. Look, it's still a conversation and process. We have driven this conversation very effectively where it's become a mainstream topic within the city. So the consortium, I think, has largely done a good job within the community. It would be great to see the county vision and see how all the individual cities play into that role. From an economic standpoint, the city of Ventura as the county seat, hosting the county seat, I think has a dilemma. And I believe the dilemma is we've got about 25 to 30% of our employment is related to some kind of government service. And then we have this beer economy, right? So as I look at this, when everybody's, water bills have increased, compounding about 30% a year. We have an economy that now is largely built on beer production. So as those costs go up, the costs of those businesses are going to be driven up. As people, we have this ultra hippie generation that's into a lot of beer consumption right now. As they get older and fatter and unhealthier from all this consumption, they're not going to drink as much beer.
Every some of that.
That's why you have 2 hospitals.
So maybe by that time we'll have a diversity with our local economy with broadband. My biggest fear is if we become top heavy with government services in our city at this 25 to 30% level, and then the next phase of it, our biggest growth driver in this community is construction jobs. Look, at the end of the day, that's not a diversified economy. I mean, Greece imploded because their government employment was about 43%. We are not that far away from that. So broadband diversifies that.
So with that segue, going regional, Kevin, your thoughts from an Oxnard perspective, what you're doing, you were able to watch and visit Ventura the other night, and the thoughts that you had in terms of what lessons learned for Oxnard?
I think, as it turns out, I'm glad Ventura went first, because now we can possibly recast our experience a little bit with council. A lot's been said. I think it's just very interesting how, some members of council can get an immediate knee-jerk reaction to something, and see an investment figure and say, okay, well, it's too much money, we don't want to touch this. And the other thing I found interesting is that just the whole concept of utility. I think, when a couple council members heard utilities, like, geez, we don't want another water and gas, we don't want to have to deal with that, we can't barely deal with the utilities that we have. And then in Oxnard, we have, trash, wastewater, and water, and nobody wants another utility like that either. There's questions even about us outsourcing, some of those utilities right now. So I thought it was interesting, and I think for us, the concept around the fourth utility seems to be more about ubiquity. How do we make this, and I think the direction that we want to go, and something I guess for you guys to consider too, is keeping that municipally owned middle mile infrastructure so that we can have competition. And I think our feeling is that more providers that we can bring into the space, and not necessarily, having one more infrastructure-based provider is a good thing. It's, increase competition by 50%, but if we can build out that, even regionally, that middle mile infrastructure that the municipalities can make available like a utility, so that there's a number of providers competing for those customers, and we have cost competition there, facilitated by a government-owned or municipally developed middle mile infrastructure. I think that model really seems to be appealing in the long term to really get us to where we need to be. And somebody said, and maybe this person didn't read the plan, but what was groundbreaking about it, what was going to be precedent setting, and I think in this type of model where we're hoping that we're really bringing some much lower prices for good broadband by, introducing more competition there. So some providers seem to be willing to look at that. And anyway, I found those two concepts just very interesting in front of that council. And I think for us to be prepared to answer those questions about, okay, well, if the uptake rates or the prices don't look like this, here's a proof of concept phase or something else that we can at least start with and show that this is going to work. And better casting, we've talked about this, how we talk about that utility concept and what that might look like, and the various flavors that we might take and might deploy, as various phases of this. It may not look like, this specific model on the plan. That's one flavor of an approach that we can take, but there's more that we can take, and we shouldn't be precluded from doing that. So those are some things I think that we'll have to wrestle with. And I was salivating over your 5 million Measure O surplus. Like, man, if we had that in Oxnard, we're in a much different situation, much worse financial situation. So we don't have any surplus. In fact, we're looking at deficit next year. So we're gonna have to be much more creative in terms of how we make that work. But on the flip side, we do have fiber already that we can leverage, and so I think we wanna be careful to show, you know, to your point, just how do we monetize that and show council, really a model for monetizing that asset and showing some return with investing that to rebuild, so.
And that's really key, I think.
Kevin,
Be different.
Kevin, this is Joe. I want to emphasize that you know, working on both the Ventura and the Oxnard projects. Oxnard does have an advantage because of the relative amount of fiber that they already have installed, so the relative cost of entry should be a little lower. It's good to watch the Ventura Council, but compared to Ventura, you do have an asset that you could begin to monetize at a relatively low cost of entry.
Well, and there's several approaches that they could do too. So they could do a slow grow, and instead of jumping in and having to, well, first of all, like Ventura, have to spend, you know, the $6 million on the traffic signal upgrade, they can not even go into the full wave deployment and lit service model. They could start with a dark fiber model, giving up more strands of dark fiber, but they've got plenty of fiber strands to be able to handle that. And that would allow them to generate funds, proof of concept, gain more political will, show that the risk is worth it, and have the enterprise fund concept with some funds for continuing to buy equipment and ultimately implement the lit.
You know what, we understand that. I mean, some of us do, I think, most of us do. The dilemma is, council doesn't understand that.
Right.
They don't understand the difference between dark and lit. They don't understand, you know, DWDM equipment, et cetera. They don't understand, you know, optical transport. They do not understand these concepts. And my takeaway is, yes, it's $10 million, okay? But worst case scenario, that infrastructure's in the ground. What is it worth after it's in the ground? You know, is it worth $30 million and they could sell the whole network to a private enterprise? So that's part of the discussion which is missing.
Well, I think it's important to note, so council did take staff recommendation, and part of that recommendation is to continue to explore these opportunities. The first project that Magellan has recommended that we include the fiber component, if I remember correctly, is until 2021. So essentially what we've done is bought ourselves additional time to continue to explore these opportunities. So by no means do we not intend to continue doing this. This wasn't a shelf this project, never talk about fiber or publicly owned fiber ever again. It's just a means to continue to explore more time sensitive opportunities for the city.
There was another comment on the phone? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, Mitchell, who was that spoke before you? Was that George?
Yes.
Yeah.
George, I agree with you, but I think maybe our challenge isn't necessarily to educate the council on the technologies of DWDM or lit versus dark. I think the way to approach the presentation of council is the difference between monetizing an existing asset lying fallow and unused.
Yes.
Versus the cost of investing in new assets that can be very significant. I think that's a fundamental advantage that Oxnard has, for example. Relatively large amounts of fiber, unused, that could be monetized at relatively low cost. Whether that's dark fiber leasing or an early pilot, I think, Kevin, those are the kinds of things we want to talk about in your council presentation.
And I think that, Joe, I think you're right, when it comes to that model will work very well for cities like Oxnard that already have assets. And we saw that you need to take a different approach on the model with cities like Ventura that are in the process of building the assets but don't have the funds yet to do it immediately. But then obviously to continue over time. There's other models that we haven't talked about either, and I think it's very key that, you know, when we're talking about the region, we're not going to just talk about Ventura and Oxnard, that there are so many other models to look at. And, you know, I'd like to speak just momentarily about what's happening in Paso Robles, because the other key thing that I think we need to communicate is not just what's laying in the ground fallow, but also just going back to our original discussion, and that's the value of broadband and reshaping your community and the economic development and have it as a driver and not only for economic development, but for community services. And Sasha talked, talked a little bit briefly about things like telemedicine and things like virtual education and sensor networks and other smart city applications. I'm not gonna go through all of them, but those things are, and then government innovation and mobility and public safety. Both those things are very key in urban planning. And so councils need to understand that broadband is really, needs to be a section in their general plan. And when they rewrite their general plan for the visioning of their cities for the next 20 years, that broadband has to be a component of that, and it needs to have its own separate tab, but it also needs to be woven into mobility, into civic development, into private development, into the public right-of-ways, and all the other disciplines that the general plan covers. But there are other models, and that is that we can entice investors to come in. And I know, George, you're feeling that the city should own this and control
Not necessarily.
these investments. Okay, so they don't have to fully own and control. Sometimes they can have good benefactors that do this for them. And so the city has some assets, and they can make those assets available and prime the pump for others to come in and invest, creating that competitive environment that we all know is very key for all of us to work. Break down the monopolies, bring in the competition, lower the cost of broadband, and increase the speeds, the reliability, and customer service. And there are private partnership models of partners coming in who are not just contractors, who are marketing and who are managing and operating the municipal assets. There are investors that will come in and that will implement this for the municipalities. And it goes all the way from like a sci-fi model to a model which is exclusive, to a model where it's non-exclusive, and they'll come in and invest and put conduit and fiber in the ground, which is shareable. And they bring in multiple ISPs, which generates a virtual marketplace of services. And that's really good for the economy, and it's good for all the other disciplines that I talked about, including livability. So,
Jory, that more accurately reflects my beliefs right there.
So I want to keep the conversation moving, and my ears perked up when Kevin started talking about this middle mile open network, and I want to go back to Brian now and say, you've been watching these two counties, you've got your own plan. Where's your entry point?
Sure.
In
So
Moore Park?
we have a slightly different setup of kind of what our, I'll call the intangible assets are, and then where we're at procedurally. So in Moore Park, we have political will. We've long had the political will, so I'm covered there. What we don't have is the scale of the larger cities, and our current fiber optic infrastructure is one piece of empty conduit that runs a few dozen feet under a railroad track with nothing in it. So anything that we build will be from scratch. There are reasons for that. Things like we don't have water utilities or any other utility that would have normally had a benefit of some communication system. The lion's share of our signals are actually not ours, they are Caltrans, because our commercial corridor, LA Avenue and Moore Park Avenue, our secondary ones, are those state highways, which means we don't run those signals. So where we are at kind of in the process is recognizing the value of getting broadband to the city. Is we talk about this RFP, but we are going to council with it on July 17th at our next meeting. And unless there are large changes, which we're not anticipating, we will release that RFP. We're planning on that Friday, July 19th. Majority will receive it. I'll give it to Bill to hopefully distribute to the network here, so everyone will see it. But basically, we're looking at getting an expert on board to help us facilitate this. So it's kind of we don't know what we don't know. I mean, we've heard, a lot of the things that you get, a dig once policy, great. Find me a dig once policy, because I'm not a dig once policy expert. Find me, the planning standards to say, hey, we're going to require conduit in all these new neighborhoods, just like we require electric lines and gas lines and water lines in all of these streets. Get that for us. We have taken this already to one of our council subcommittees, our broadband ad hoc committee. They reviewed the RFP, had a few comments, but kind of the bigger picture type stuff that they discussed was one good thing we have in Moore Park is Spectrum does have I'll say 99.9% of our residences throughout the whole city have gigabit connectivity right now, download speeds, correct. It's not cheap, but it's available. So basically, if you have cable TV, hooked up to your house, you have the ability to get fiber optic now. Now, where that comes into play is in our commercial areas, which never had a television cable connection run to the street, they are unserved. So that when we looked at our, where we want to focus our efforts, we felt that, if we focus on the whole city, including the residential areas, it slows everything down when you're throwing more resources in that area. And what the best case scenario would be to, foster competition and drive down the price of that, which, there's a public good to that. But when we put that in light of, is that worth slowing down the deployment and our efforts to get to our unserved commercial areas? At least on the committee level, it was, no, we think that we need to get rid of these unserved areas, tackle that problem, and then we can worry about, bringing in more competition and whatnot to the whole city. So it's the focus on the commercial side. We have 3 major business districts. One, just because it happened to be across the street from a bunch of homes and had some customers early on, is lit up. The other 2 are not. And so that's what we're kind of focusing on now. So the RFP will be out next month if all goes well. And we'll get someone on board to do kind of the bureaucratic things we need to make Moore Park attractive, and anything else that this consultant can tell us, hey, if you do this, this will help. And the second part is, with these 2 targeted areas, what can we do to get in there? In the meantime, we are not resting on our laurels just waiting for this RFP, but we continue to meet with multiple providers and ISPs. We were successful in getting one new company who goes through the air, entering into the Moore Park market. And, we went through property owner after property owner after property owner to find one that was conducive to it. And we found a nice 4-story hotel under construction, and that deal is inked. So it's a little longer for construction since the building has to be there before you can mount something to it.
It needs power.
But so we're working there, and that's our progress.
Spectrum, they have symmetrical speeds, 1 gig symmetrical speeds.
Not on the residential side, it's download only right now.
So I think one challenge we ran into is communicating the importance of those symmetrical speeds, specifically to the business community, and I think that's still an educational item we have to take on. And I think some council members are getting that, and they understand the value of that. But
yes. And Gil can probably add to that on the phone, but commercially for their offerings, that is available.
I think the other key component on this is that whenever governments get involved with their utilities, power or gas, or water, and we know that most cities have their own water districts, or subscribe to a water district. But when they partner with them more, meet with them more, they become, the communities get better service. And what I continue to see happen is that when I ask a client, well, when was the last time you talked to your broadband service provider, your incumbents, and they said, oh, we can do that.
They're there, they exist.
And then we do get, from some cities, well, we do have a government affairs liaison, and we talk to that person probably once a year. But I said, well, have you ever encouraged them to invest? Have you ever, asked the incumbents what they need to do a better job of serving their community, because they're already invested? And I said, well, they sponsor a baseball team, or they help sponsor a picnic or a festival or something like that. And I said, but have you ever asked them about what their future investment and what the roadmap looks like for your community? No, we didn't think that we could get that from them. So there's this disconnect, even with and I'm concerned about this because municipalities need to see this as a utility. So there's this disconnect with those that have already invested. So I wonder 5 years from now, when we look at the landscape again and see all the new players who have invested, what the cities are doing to continue to engage with them to make continuous improvements. So there's the leadership, goes back to leadership.
And about leadership, they don't understand. And the perfect example of this relates to Spectrum and AT&T. They don't understand that 100% coverage by Spectrum and AT&T does not necessarily mean fiber optic connectivity to the home or the business premise. The way Spectrum and AT&T present, the large part of these networks are copper-based out to the last mile. And council doesn't understand that as part of 100% coverage. All they understand is we have 100% coverage, it works well, and you know what, our voters are happy. But they don't understand that, you know, Spectrum throttles, Spectrum changes speeds, the shared network based on a cable network compared to a copper network run by the public utility or fiber to the premise is a completely different network, and the bottleneck occurs at the central office, whereas in the cable network, it occurs within the cable itself because the cable only has so much capacity. So that's something that they don't understand when they hear 100% coverage.
And they never will.
No,
We've
absolutely.
got to figure out how to bring
Absolutely.
that communication.
There's never been 100% coverage. Even when they put the copper in the ground, it was based on a formula of 4-to-1. One user to 4.
What's significant to me, looking back over the last year and how this conversation has evolved, is we're reaching that critical point now where it's really, you're actually creating roadmaps. And we're getting to the point where it's important that Mitchell, Kevin, Brian, everybody is talking about this regionally. Because we don't want to be duplicative as much as we want to leverage, you know, these conversations. And we can't do this once a month. We're going to have to do it on a regular, ongoing basis. And I think, Jory, you know, in terms of putting a bow on the two cities and now going to a regional perspective, you know, do you have any thoughts about Brian Ganley? He's been talking and reaching out to folks at the same time, and you obviously are making plans with him. How do we capture the synergies that every city's gonna be different, but yet we're all gonna wanna interconnect? Bob?
Might I suggest a private forum for the consortium, where rather than waiting once a month, we could be talking about something and people could be putting something up.
Jory, you know, you're helping to herd cats here, you know, and
Yeah, well, I think, you know, the advances that Oxnard and Ventura have made, and now Moorpark are gonna be very beneficial for the next go around. I feel that the county, I've spoken with Ryan several times, and I don't wanna represent Ryan at this point in time, but from my perspective, the county would be better served by not doing yet its own master plan, like others are doing. I think the county would better serve the region and all of the communities within the region by doing a regional master plan, not a county facility master plan. And what that looks like, and Brian and I are speaking about this, is that it's not a blueprint for how to build this network over 20 years. It's actually building the network. And so it's pulling together elements of the consortium, it's pulling in all of the cities that want to participate in a coalition, and it's cobbling together public and private assets and actually getting it built, rather than just doing another study.
Right.
I just want to speak to one other thing too. The conversations that exist among at least the regional governments, because I'm part of that, those conversations are not limited to this room, this table, this month. I mean, if you look at my email box for last month, Mitchell and I are going back and forth, Kevin and I are going back and forth. I owe Cynthia a phone call, who's on the phone right now. This happens, and you know, I can personally say I've benefited substantially from having the networking that's here. Now I know the person, they know me, so whenever one of us needs anything, we're all doing that. And, you know, there are benefits on the ground. I have an RFP that's much better informed because, like Mitchell, when I came over here, I'm not a broadband expert, I'm a policy guy. So, but now I can have that educated discussion with it, and, you know, it is, you know, working. I don't need a meeting to necessarily, yeah, it's good for meeting new people. It's not necessary for us to continue our efforts combined.
Yeah, absolutely. So along that line, I mean, just even this week, I mean, Cynthia and I were on the phone yesterday. Tim and I were on the phone, I think, or an email with on Monday. And, you know, I speak with Kevin sometimes twice a week, sometimes once a week. Speaking a lot more with Mitchell now. We spoke a lot with Tim on a regular basis. And the more cities that we get involved, the more we're gonna have this sort of, and private sector, third parties, the more we're gonna have this discussion about how to build this, and how to go about architecting it, and who all the players are, and what the roles are gonna be. And it's sort of informal right now, but I believe that once the county gets started, it's gonna become formalized.
Has the point of equality come up in any of these discussions? Because the goal is ubiquity, but the reason is equality. You know?
That equality concept came up in some of the Santa Monica presentations.
Yeah,
kind of tied together.
Right.
Absolutely.
But do they see that line drawn? You know?
I think in general, councils are very concerned about the areas where the services aren't getting deployed. My experience has been like when Files was first rolled out, you don't want to cherry pick neighborhoods. In San Leandro, the council was very concerned about the digital divide and digital literacy, and how much work have we done with the school district. In Concord, it was a particular section of the city. It was a naval weapons depot that was getting repurposed, and their major concern was they were gonna lay out a great broadband plan, and we did some design engineering for that new section of the city, which is almost the same size as the existing city today. And they were concerned about the haves and the have-nots, and what they were gonna do or have to do to invest in the older part of the city. And the same thing in Vallejo. How are they going to handle the development of Mare Island, very much like the issues that they had in Concord. In the South Bay project, it's, well, we can't just serve the expensive and high-profile beach cities. It's got to be Lomita and Carson and Hawthorne and all the others as well. I think equality is kind of distributed pretty well in all of these discussions. In Santa Monica, it was like, okay, well, now you serve the businesses, what are you doing about the low-income families? The high-income earners, they can afford to buy the high-rate commercial services, but government should invest for low-income housing units as well. So Santa Monica has almost stopped marketing for the commercial sector, and is now just building out for 100 low-income housing properties.
Yeah, low income housing.
It's only 1.2 million.
Believe it or not, there are 45,000 units.
Wow.
I did read that this past week, the FCC has taken a focus on multi-unit local premise broadband deployment. So it'll be interesting to see how that
I
helps
think
this
there's some
discussion.
other part of that discussion too. I know that there's been discussion, and that we continue to have that discussion here under Bill's leadership, and that is, you know, how does Fillmore get served and Santa Paula and Ojai, they can't be left out of the loop.
So I have two agenda items. I want to take 60 seconds for each item, and then let's just open it up and go around the table for the last 10 minutes. Fillmore, Santa Paula, this chart came out of those conversations, and it's kind of where I think the conversation is going to go in the next 3 to 6 months. You know, and that is when you start talking about anchor institutions and ways to get to different places, you know, where your corridors and right of ways and all that. A lot of this is gonna need to be stored and managed, and I think that, yes, cities have ways to do it, we're also gonna be looking at regional ways to do it, and we've gotta figure out how this conversation interconnects among ourselves. And so that's where, you know, this is where this is connecting. These are the kinds of things we need to be talking about. And so that's, I've got this thing called the municipality roadmap. It was just, this is how you spell broadband. It's time to really relook at that and say, this is how we're going to connect to each other. You know, I think that's the next version of what our roadmap's gonna look like, and it's gonna take an awful lot of what Magellan's doing, and just kind of policy, make it more policy, you know, or process discussion in terms of what we need to do as a region. So that being said, what is the future of the consortium? Yes, I'll be running around to rural areas with CPUC money and trying to do unserved areas, but this conversation that we've been having is very different, and I think that what our role is in that is gonna be something we wanna talk about and continue to talk about. I don't have the answer today, we don't have time to talk about it today. But education and literacy is just that somebody wrote me yesterday and said, when are we gonna talk about broadband and economic development? You know, in the kinds of projects we can be doing. Well, is that something we wanna do? You know, that's gonna change this meeting. Once the infrastructure's in place, then what? You know, and so, I don't know what piece of the elephant's gonna be next, but, you know, we're gonna need to talk about it.
That's why it needs to be woven into general planning and urban planning.
One thing to throw out, though, I don't know when, but I guess, you know, I'm just amazed that the state, going from CPUC mandate of served is 6-1, and that's just.
Are you kidding me?
How do we get that changed? I mean, that is beyond absurd. If we have state surplus money that we could be using and possibly leveraging that, I mean, that's just absolutely ludicrous. If the state says 6-1 is served.
Well, I mean, that's my realm. I know the exact process to get the law changed, but my concern, and I legitimately don't know the answer to it.
But the answer is to take the guys who are using the broadband in Sacramento and put them on 6-1 in their office and see how they like it. So, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
My concern, it's a simple law change. We can get, any of us can get our assembly member or senator to do that. I worry for the unintended consequences. So, I mean, the standard is 6-1. No one is building anything now to 6-1, right? It's much, much higher. It may not be the gigabit that we want, but it's, you know, well over the 6-1. I think the standard, changing the standard would allow more funding to go to the or to expand that underserved group. And without knowing, like, you know, just say for our region, where we're at within that spectrum. So let's say we're at 100 and it changes to 25. Well, great, now we're even further behind in the line for funding than we would be if we were at 50 and they set the new standard at 100. We're great, now we're eligible, we moved up in the line. And, you know, I mean, who's capable of doing that analysis? You know, be some legislative thing up in Sacramento, but, you know, there's nuance to it.
Right, true.
So let's, we've covered a lot of ground, but I want to give, if we haven't covered everything people want to cover, I want to give that the opportunity as well. Let's start on the phone. If there's anybody on the phone that has something they want to share to the group, you know, this would be a good time to do it.
Hi guys, this is Jim. I can share just following off what we were just talking about. So we're excited that Santa Paula, we are creating a digital divide in one respect by having one residential area brand new that has gigabit to the home, gig up and gig down. So we're working with the city to try to spread that out to the rest of the community as well. So, but the good news is we do have that going forward. I think we're lighting that up in the next 2 weeks. So the new homes are, the model homes, the new homes that are coming in for purchase in Santa Paula will have gigabit up and down. So I think we're going to end the bottleneck or any issues with them. But we're happy to, because we're now using this as our first foothold in Durham County as we talk to the other cities. And we're excited.
Bill,
That's
what are
great.
they gonna charge?
Hi, this is,
Go ahead.
sorry. No, new question, or is someone gonna respond to that?
There was a question, Tim, what's your charging, what rate are you gonna charge for the gig of speed?
$69.
Wow.
That's phenomenal.
Wow.
Sign me up.
I'll tell you, the reason this is working is because the developer worked with us, so this is fully funded by us, however, they're letting us come in while those dry utilities were open. And so it's the same thing they do for the incumbents anyway, I mean, every time, so it's not an advantage. But because they're doing that for us, it's allowing us to make this work at a more reasonable rate. If we have to go build this brand new one or get an existing neighborhood, it costs a lot more money, and that's why we're trying to work with the municipalities to try to even make that a more affordable cost.
Yeah.
That's a game changer for Santa Paula.
That's
So
disruptive
in effect, those
in a good way.
are greenfield deployments,
Yeah.
in effect.
Tim, is that fiber to the premise, or is that a wireless last mile?
Fiber to the premise.
Yeah.
Excellent. My question is going to be both to Moore Park and to Ventura. What are the timings of the RFPs that are coming up to which people might respond?
Ventura first?
We're still working out some of the details, but I think it's gonna be a matter of how quickly we can write the RFP and how quickly we can get it out. Obviously, we need to take the input of our economic development committee, so I'll keep the group informed as more information becomes available.
Yeah. You had dates, right?
Yeah, on the North Park side, we're through all of our council committees. The RFP is fully drafted. Because of July 4th, we miss a council meeting date. So our next meeting is July 17th, and unless the council gives me some feedback that I can't just do, insert this word here, then we will hopefully approve it by the council on July 17th, which translates to a website posting and mailing on July 19th.
Thank you.
Anybody else on the phone?
This is Cynthia with Crown Castle. I just want to tell everybody thank you. It's been very informative. And we have some meetings coming up with some of the cities and counties, and we're looking into our small cell deployment as well. See if that can offset some of the costs that might be incurred with some of the fiber that we're looking at for future projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cynthia. How about around phone or around the table here? Anything, Greg?
Our next symposium, I would suggest, should focus on leadership education. Really getting all of the players into the room and explaining what the whole process is, what the ROI component looks like, all those kind of things. If that's the crux of our problem, if where the challenges lie, we need to educate those people and bring them up to speed so we're all on the same page.
Yeah. Well, the train's moving pretty fast. We got a lull, we got vacation, this is summer, but at the same time, it didn't stop in terms of progress. And so, between planning for symposiums, having this regional conversation, getting ourselves organized and entrepreneuring where we're gonna go next. We've got, our plates are full.
That's the good news.
Yeah.
I just have some general thoughts here, and that is, I think I started coming to these meetings about 9 months or 10 months ago. And I think a lot has happened in that period of time under Bill's leadership, and I want to thank you for the work that you're doing, and I'm hopeful that you'll be able to continue to work with us in the region. It's very beneficial. I was wondering if there was something that we could add to your agenda.
Well, yeah, I was also going to ask you for a streetlight update.
There's a lot happening at the state level that's concerning to all of us, and I don't know that gets easily shared with all the communities in the Tri-County area, and something needs to be done.
Okay.
But first of all, we need to be aware of what it is, and I think you're the right instrument to communicate those things, especially the prohibition about media networks, which is floating through the assembly right now, which we need to put a stop to. So it's not just education, but I think it's political will and leadership for the region. And if you can help with that, I think.
Yeah, that'd be of interest. So I'm aware of that.
Do you have a bill number on that?
No, but I can forward it.
I can do that.
But also in the time that I've been working with you all, there's been a number of conversations with third parties too. So what I thought was, an agricultural region is really, it's starting to develop, over the years. I drive through Ventura County a lot to get to other places north, but, I spend a lot of time here now, and I'm starting to appreciate, the communities and the urban planning that's been going on for decades here, and what's really the transformative kinds of policies that have been implemented for a long period of time. And communities in a region going from agricultural to urban, but still holding on to some of the original elements of the agricultural history that it has. I also have witnessed that not just the communities themselves wanting to get involved in broadband, but there are a lot more private third parties that are available here in Ventura County than there are in other client areas that we support. And so I think this is, I'm gonna go back to my original statement, this is fertile ground. And I think that our next steps for a county approach and a building, let's get it built, I think is very viable because of the richness of resources, both municipal and commercial.
I think we're done.
All
I
right,
think the meeting's adjourned, everybody.
thank you.
Good job.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep.